My sister's wedding was full of surprises. The groom was none other than my ex-husband. She took the mic and smiled proudly. He divorced my sister just to marry me. My parents beamed with joy as the room erupted in applause. But the moment I stood up for my speech, my sister's smile faded, and her face turned pale. By the window of her office overlooking Manhattan's skyscrapers, Caroline Williams was making final adjustments to her presentation before the upcoming deadline. Her slender, refined fingers danced lightly across the keyboard. She had made a name for herself as a shrewd marketing director at one of New York's leading advertising agencies. Her perfect bob haircut and intellectual-looking glasses seemed to reflect her sharp judgment and insight. "Caroline, that's a brilliant proposal. The client is going to love it," said her boss James, patting her shoulder. Caroline was always valued and respected at work. However, away from the office, her expression carried a deep shadow. Especially when family topics came up, her eyes would momentarily cloud over. 5 years ago, she had divorced Nathan Foster, an obstetrician. The official reason was because Caroline couldn't have children. These words followed her like a curse at every family gathering. "Carol, if only you had tried a little harder. You were married to a doctor, why didn't you get proper treatment? Such a shame you couldn't continue the family line." Her mother Eleanor's words were always accusatory. Eleanor had dedicated her life to building the perfect family, and Caroline's failure had deeply wounded her pride. Her father Henry was the same. A successful architect, he was extremely afraid of exposing the family's flaws to the world. "Look, see what a wonderful boyfriend Vanessa has brought? She'll certainly give us adorable grandchildren." Every time Eleanor spoke like this at family gatherings, Caroline struggled desperately to maintain her smile. Her sister Vanessa worked as a nurse at the same hospital and, as a former colleague of Nathan's, had always been doted on by their parents as the perfect daughter. "Aren't you coming to the next family trip?" Vanessa's voice dripped with artificial concern. "Everyone feels uncomfortable with someone who doesn't have children. If it were me, I could have had healthy children." Such conversations repeated themselves whenever relatives gathered. After Caroline's divorce, her parents began to distance her from family gatherings. They told relatives that our daughter was abandoned by her husband because she couldn't bear children, treating her existence as if it were something shameful. Caroline took a glass of wine and exhaled deeply. From her high-rise Manhattan apartment, she could see the beautiful view of Central Park at dusk. Though she valued her alone time, occasionally she imagined children's laughter echoing through this spacious room. At such moments, a sharp pain would pierce her heart. "You are not defective," she could almost hear her late grandmother Rose whisper in her ear. Her grandmother had been the only one in the family who loved and understood Caroline unconditionally. Keeping her grandmother's parting words close to her heart, "Value your family, but value yourself too," she had endured all this time. The phone rang, pulling Caroline from her thoughts. The display showed Mom. After a moment's hesitation, she took a deep breath and answered. "Caroline, I have news for you." Her mother's voice was unusually excited. "Vanessa is engaged. Isn't that wonderful? Congratulations, Mom." "And to Vanessa too," Caroline said, controlling her emotions. "The wedding is next month." "Of course, you must come," Eleanor continued. "But do try not to stand out. This day is about Vanessa." After a moment of silence, Caroline quietly replied, "I understand, Mom." After hanging up, she stood by the window, gazing at the night view. No matter how much it hurt, to honor her grandmother's words, she had decided to attend the family event. The banquet hall of the Grand Riverside, a luxury hotel in the New York suburbs, was decorated with roses and white ribbons. Several chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a soft light that enveloped the entire room in an elegant atmosphere. 50 guests were already seated, in the midst of Vanessa and Nathan's wedding ceremony. Caroline was seated at the very edge of the family section. Following her mother's instruction to why not stand out, she wore a pale gray dress and tried her best not to attract attention. Still, her dignified presence occasionally drew glances from relatives around her. "You look pale, are you all right?" Aunt Martha approached her. Her words carried more curiosity than concern. "Yes, I'm fine," Caroline smiled gently. "It's a lovely ceremony." Truthfully, her heart was in turmoil. Vanessa radiant in her designer white dress, beaming with joy. And beside her stood Nathan, the man who was once her husband. Watching them pledge their love to each other was more painful than she had expected. The ceremony proceeded perfectly. Vanessa and Nathan solemnly exchanged vows and rings. Caroline quietly observed, remembering her own wedding 5 years ago. Back then, she never imagined a day like this would come. The reception began, and food was served. Relatives were engaged in lively conversation, with occasional bursts of laughter. Only Caroline couldn't blend into the circle. "Carol, could you show a bit more of a smile?" her father Henry said in a low voice. "Everyone thinks you're in a bad mood." Caroline nodded silently and took a sip of champagne. Midway through the reception, the host announced it was time for speeches. First came the parents. Henry and Eleanor stood together on the stage, offering words of blessing for their daughter and new son. "Vanessa, you have always been our pride," Eleanor said, seemingly overcome with emotion. "Nathan, we couldn't be happier to welcome you into our family." Next, friends gave their speeches, and the venue was filled with a warm atmosphere. Then suddenly, Vanessa stood up and took the microphone from the host. "Everyone, thank you for coming today." Her voice echoed throughout the hall. "Since this is a special day, I want to share the truth with all of you." Caroline felt uneasy, her spine freezing. Vanessa's eyes turned briefly toward her. "Actually, Nathan divorced my sister to marry me," Vanessa proudly declared. The venue buzzed with murmurs. He wanted a real family. He believed that with me he could build the home he desired. Caroline felt the blood drain from her face. In front of her, and in front of 50 people, her sister was exposing the truth about her divorce. The hall fell silent for a moment, then gradually, applause began to rise. "Good for you, finally found true happiness," a relative called out to Nathan. "God had a wonderful plan," Eleanor said joyfully, holding Vanessa's hand. "You two were destined from the beginning." While the atmosphere in the venue overflowed with blessings, only the area around Caroline's seat remained cold. She sat motionless, only her hand holding the glass trembled slightly. She closed her eyes, desperately holding back tears rolling down her cheeks. At that moment the host's voice resonated. "Now, let's hear a few words from the sister of the bride." Caroline's eyes widened at the sudden invitation. The venue fell silent, and all eyes turned to her. The color drained from Vanessa's face, and she hurriedly tried to stop it. "No, my sister has nothing to say." But it was too late. The guests were looking at Caroline with expectation and curiosity. She took a deep breath and slowly stood up. Feeling her legs trembling, she walked with dignity toward the stage. Seeing this, Vanessa's smile froze. Nathan was visibly disturbed, gripping his chair's armrest tightly. Her parents also changed color, exchanging anxious glances. Caroline stood on the stage and took the microphone. The venue was deathly quiet. With a gentle smile she began her speech. "Congratulations on your marriage, Vanessa and Nathan." Her voice was calm. "It is an honor to be present on my sister's happy day." There was a relieved sigh from the audience. Vanessa and Nathan slightly relaxed their tension, and her parents showed expressions of relief. Caroline continued. "My sister and I have shared many memories since we were little. Vanessa has always been the pride of our parents. And today, she has taken the first step toward creating a new family." She paused and looked around the room. Then, suddenly, she changed her tone. "But it seems today is a day for truth." Vanessa audibly gasped. Nathan leaned forward, and her parents hurriedly tried to stand up. "Actually?" Caroline took out a folder from her black clutch bag. At that moment Vanessa's face turned ashen, and Nathan tried to rise from his seat. Her parents were desperate to stop her, but Caroline's determination was firm. As she opened the folder and was about to take out its contents, the lights in the hall flickered momentarily, and the scene went dark. 2 weeks before the wedding, Caroline was working late in her Manhattan office. With an upcoming presentation for a new client, she was immersed in fine-tuning the details. Outside it was already dark, and while looking at her reflection in the window, she sighed. Since receiving the invitation to her sister's wedding, her heart had been unsettled. Her smartphone vibrated, and the screen showed a call from an unknown number. Normally she would ignore it, but thinking it might be work-related, she answered. "Hello, Caroline Williams speaking." "Caroline? It's Margaret Dawson, remember me?" She searched her memory for a moment. The name Margaret Dawson was certainly familiar, an administrator at the hospital where Nathan worked. During her marriage, she had met this woman several times at hospital events. "Yes, of course I remember. Margaret, what is it? I want to talk to you in person." Margaret's voice had urgency. "There's something you should know. Something very important." "Has something happened?" "I can't say over the phone. Do you have time tomorrow afternoon? Could we meet at Café Lumière in Midtown?" Caroline checked her schedule and found an opening. "3 works for me, thank you. Please come. This information is important for you." After the call ended, Caroline finished her remaining work with a mix of anxiety and curiosity. She couldn't imagine what Margaret wanted to discuss. The next afternoon, Caroline sat at a quiet corner table in Café Lumière. From her window seat, she could see busy people passing by. The door opened, and Margaret entered. In her early 50s, she appeared a bit older than Caroline remembered, but her sharp eyes remained unchanged. "Caroline, thank you for coming." Margaret sat down and got straight to the point. "I wanted to meet in person because I have something to show you." She took out a brown envelope from her bag. "I left the hospital last month. I was tasked with organizing old records before transitioning to a new system, and that's when I found this." "What did you Caroline stared at the envelope. Nathan's medical records, Margaret said in a lowered voice. His own. Caroline frowned. Why show me this? Look. Margaret took out documents from the envelope and placed them in front of Caroline. They were medical test results. The date was 11 years ago, 3 years before Caroline and Nathan were married. This is Caroline read through the documents and gasped at their contents. Nathan has severe male infertility, Margaret said quietly. Extremely low sperm count and poor motility. The diagnosis states that natural conception is nearly impossible. Caroline felt something collapse inside her. With trembling hands, she held the documents, reading them over and over. Is this real? Without a doubt. I manage these records, Margaret nodded. And there's something else you should know. Vanessa worked in the department that managed Nathan's medical records. She knew this fact from the beginning. Caroline was speechless. After a long silence, she finally spoke. Why didn't he tell me? Why did he keep blaming me? Male pride, especially as a doctor, Margaret said sadly. What's worse is that he tried to falsify records to hide his condition. Here's the evidence. She produced another document, a copy of an email Nathan had sent to the hospital's IT staff. It requested access restrictions to his medical records and modifications to specific data. I thought something was odd when I saw this. When I investigated, I discovered he was trying to hide the fact of his infertility, Margaret explained quietly. And there's one more thing you should know. Your parents have known about this for 2 years. What? Caroline's voice rose. Vanessa told them. She asked them not to tell my sister and they agreed. I accidentally overheard their conversation. Caroline stared blankly out the window. A feeling of betrayal unlike anything she had ever experienced overwhelmed her. Why are you telling me this now? Before leaving the hospital, I wanted to do the right thing, Margaret said with a serious expression. I've seen you being called a defective and alienated from your family. That's wrong. You deserve to know the truth. The two sat in silence for a long time. The cafe's bustle seemed distant. In Caroline's mind, memories were being reconstructed under a new light. Nathan's strange attitude, Vanessa's meaningful words, her parents' coldness, everything connected. All the evidence is yours? Margaret pushed the envelope toward Caroline. What you do with it is up to you. But I wanted you to know. Caroline accepted the envelope and put it in her bag. Thank you, Margaret. I appreciate your courage. After leaving the cafe, Caroline sat on a park bench, almost overwhelmed by intense emotions, anger, sadness, the pain of betrayal, and a strange sense of liberation. The people who had called her defective, alienated her from family, and torn her heart apart, had actually known the truth all along while continuing to blame her. That night Caroline called her friend Laura and confided everything. Unbelievable. Laura's voice was filled with anger. Are you going to the wedding? I don't know, Caroline answered honestly. But I won't remain silent. What will you do, reveal everything? Caroline's voice had regained its composure. Make the truth known. You'll destroy your family, Laura warned. They destroyed my life first, Caroline replied, gazing at the night view outside her window. For 5 years I've blamed myself. Enough is enough. Over the next few days Caroline verified the evidence, consulting with medical specialists to confirm the authenticity of the diagnosis. Everything was genuine. She also met with a lawyer, seeking legal advice about disclosing medical records. The day before the wedding, Caroline quietly resolved. She would sit at the edge of the family section, endure all the lies and humiliation, and then reveal the truth at the appropriate moment. The anger that had been sealed away for so long, now burned like a quiet flame within her. She opened her laptop and began drafting her speech. The first sentence was, "Truth sometimes comes with pain, but it is what sets us free. Tomorrow, everything would change." With this thought, Caroline lay down on her bed. Strangely, she fell into the most peaceful sleep she had experienced in years. The venue's lighting was restored, bringing brightness back to the hall. The momentary blackout seemed to herald the revelation of truth that was about to occur. Caroline continued to stand on the stage with the microphone in hand. Her expression was calm, but the determination in her eyes was unwavering. I apologize, there seems to have been an issue with the electrical system, the host said with a light laugh. Ms. Caroline, please continue. Caroline nodded and took a deep breath. The venue was again shrouded in silence, with all eyes on her. Looking at Vanessa and Nathan's seats, both were visibly disturbed. Vanessa's face was pale, and Nathan sat restlessly in his chair. At her parents' seats, her mother Eleanor clasped her hands as if in prayer, while her father Henry watched his daughter with bated breath. Earlier, I was talking about memories of my sister and ex-husband, Caroline continued in a gentle voice. Our family has many memories. Christmas mornings when we gathered to open gifts. The surprise we made with a homemade cake for Dad's birthday. When we called out Vanessa's name loudly at her high school graduation. Warm smiles spread throughout the venue, easing the atmosphere. Caroline also smiled, but her eyes remained calm. But since Vanessa said this is a day for truth, let me also share the truth. Her tone changed. About the real reason Nathan and I divorced. At that moment the venue seemed to freeze. Vanessa tried to stand up but Nathan grabbed her arm to stop her. Her parents were clearly agitated. Caroline took copies of the medical records and the specialist's diagnosis statement from her clutch bag, and instructed the hotel staff beside her. Seconds later, the documents were projected onto the venue's screen. "This is Nathan's infertility diagnosis," Caroline said calmly. "Notice the date. 3 years before our marriage." Sounds of surprise rose from the audience. Several attendees who appeared to be medical professionals leaned forward, intently studying the projected documents. In fact, Nathan, as a doctor, knew about his own severe male infertility, yet he continued to blame me. Caroline continued. "During the last 2 years of our marriage, he called me defective and humiliated me in front of family as a wife who couldn't give him children." Nathan's face reddened with anger as he stood up and shouted, "That's fabricated, she's lying." Caroline calmly showed the next document. "This is a reconfirmation diagnosis from a specialist last month. And there's something even more important." She looked around the venue, focusing on her parents and Vanessa. All three were frozen like statues. Nathan wasn't the only one who knew about this diagnosis. Caroline's voice was powerful. "My parents and sister have known this fact for 2 years. Yet they called me a defective, excluded me from family gatherings, and spread rumors among relatives that I was a woman who can't have children." The venue erupted in commotion. Relatives looked shocked, glancing back and forth between Caroline and her parents and Vanessa. Nathan tried to stand and approach the stage, but 2 friends restrained him. "Caroline, you're insane. What do you think you're doing with this story?" "I'm just telling the truth," Caroline replied calmly. "Vanessa, as a nurse, you saw these medical records from the beginning. Yet, you tormented me, had a relationship with Nathan, and today claimed that he divorced to marry me." Vanessa covered her face, trembling. She couldn't say anything in return. Caroline projected the final document. "And this is evidence that Nathan tried to falsify his medical records. It's a copy of an email to the hospital's IT staff. Please look at the date and content." The atmosphere in the venue changed. Initially filled with shock and disbelief, it gradually shifted to acceptance of the truth. Medical professionals whispered among themselves, "This is genuine," and their voices spread throughout the hall. Vanessa's friends began to distance themselves from her, with one bridesmaid asking, "Did you know?" Vanessa couldn't answer and just continued crying. Eleanor stood up and said in a trembling, angry voice, "Caroline, what do you gain by exposing family shame?" "It's the truth, Mom," Caroline answered with sadness. "For 5 years I was made to believe I was defective, but that's not true." Henry pulled Eleanor's arm to make her sit, then covered his face and began to cry. His shoulders shook violently. "I came today to say goodbye to my family," Caroline quietly said finally. "Now that I know the truth, there's no place in my life for lies and betrayal. Vanessa, Nathan, walk the path you've chosen, and to my parents, goodbye." She placed the microphone down and descended from the stage with dignity. The venue fell deathly silent, with only the sound of her footsteps echoing. Caroline made eye contact with no one as she headed for the exit. When she opened the exit door, she didn't look back, she only walked forward. Behind her, the ceremony was being cancelled, and guests were quietly beginning to leave. Confusion and shock dominated the venue, and Vanessa's dream of a perfect wedding had collapsed. Outside the hotel, Caroline exhaled deeply. The setting sun illuminated her face, and she felt a sense of freedom for the first time. Before getting into her car parked by the roadside, she looked up at the sky once. "You are not defective." Her late grandmother's words seemed to be carried on the wind. Caroline smiled and started the car's engine. 1 year later, in autumn, in front of an old brick house in Brooklyn, New York, Caroline was unloading luggage from her car. Amidst the golden leaves swirling down from the trees, a gentle smile graced her face. "Emma, could you help me?" Caroline called toward the entrance. A 10-year-old girl came running out and took a paper bag from Caroline's arms. Emma was a lively child with brown curly hair and intelligent eyes, in the final stages of being adopted by Caroline. "Can I take this to my room?" Emma peeked into the bag. "Yes, of course. But have you finished your homework?" "Almost." Emma laughed as she ran into the house. Caroline smiled as she carried the remaining luggage inside. Her life had become completely different from a year ago. After that wedding, she focused on reclaiming her life. With the help of a psychological counselor, she confronted and gradually healed from the pain of years of abuse and isolation from her family. On the living room wall hung a poster for New Beginnings, a support group she had founded for women struggling with infertility issues. Twice a month, she hosted meetings at her home, giving hope and strength to women carrying the same pain. The group's motto, "My worth is not determined by my ability to bear children," resonated with many women. While making coffee in the kitchen, Caroline's eyes fell on a newspaper article. It reported that Nathan Foster had his medical license revoked on suspicion of medical malpractice and record falsification. He was now reportedly working as a pharmaceutical sales representative in Arizona. As for Vanessa, she had disappeared the day after the wedding and quit her job at the hospital. 2 months ago, Caroline heard rumors that she had joined a religious group in Utah. There had been many contacts from her parents. Initially, the messages were full of anger and blame, but gradually they changed to apologies and requests for reconciliation. Caroline chose not to respond to them, focusing instead on her new life. Only her father's letter from last month was kept. "We committed an unforgivable mistake. But I pray that someday you will forgive us." That letter was stored in her desk drawer. Perhaps one day she would read it again, but not yet. "Laura will be here soon." Emma came running down the stairs. "Thank you, honey," Caroline smiled. Her friend Laura had been her greatest support. Through the chaotic days after the wedding, and the complex process of adoption, Laura had been by her side throughout. Today was Sunday, and they planned to have a picnic at a nearby park. Caroline looked out the window. The sky was clear and blue. She took a deep breath. "Truth sometimes brings pain, but it has set me free." Every morning she repeated these words to herself in front of the mirror. And now, they were no longer just words of comfort, but had become the truth of her life. The doorbell rang, and Emma gave a joyful cry. Caroline set down her mug and went to the door. When she opened it, Laura stood there with a warm smile. "Ready?" "It's a beautiful day," Laura said. "Yes, a perfect day," Caroline replied with a smile. The two women and Emma left the house together. Walking down the street, Caroline put her arm around Emma's shoulders. They were a new family. Though not connected by blood, they were bound by love and truth. Caroline looked up at the sky and spoke to her late grandmother in her heart. "I'm all right. I'm cherishing both myself and my family." The autumn wind danced around them, heralding the beginning of a new season. The wounds were healing, and Caroline's life was now shaped by her own choices and truth. It was the path to genuine happiness that she had sought for so long.